The October wind howled through the narrow canyon, whipping icy rain against the weathered buildings of Silverbrook Valley. Through the growing darkness, a solitary figure trudged along the muddy road, her silhouette peculiar and misshapen against the fading light. Eliza Harlow clutched her 6-month-old son Noah tightly against her chest with one arm while tugging a reluctant, pajama-clad goat with the other. They made an unlikely trio: a desperate mother, a hungry infant, and a stubborn livestock animal wearing children's sleepwear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The goat, aptly named Trouble, bleated indignantly as rain soaked through his blue flannel pajamas, a ridiculous garment that had once been a joke but now served as the animal's only protection against the biting cold. The pajamas had belonged to Noah before he outgrew them, repurposed in a moment of practical desperation. Eliza hadn't planned on keeping the goat when she fled, but Trouble had followed her from the farm, and Noah wouldn't stop crying whenever the animal strayed too far. "Just a little further," Eliza whispered, though she had no idea if that was true. Her voice was nearly lost in the wind, her auburn hair plastered against her pale face. The meager contents of her backpack, a change of clothes, Noah's bottles, and what little money she had managed to save, weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her boots, once sturdy and reliable, now squelched with every step, the left sole beginning to separate from the leather. Silverbrook Valley, Montana Territory, 1892, a place she'd picked from a tattered map solely because it was far enough from Denver to feel safe. 3 days on a train, followed by a bumpy stagecoach ride, had brought her to within 5 miles of the small settlement. Then the stagecoach had broken an axle on the rough mountain road. "Town's just over that ridge, ma'am," the driver had told her, pointing toward a distant line of hills. "Can't wait for repairs with this storm coming. You'd best start walking." The other passengers, a salesman and an elderly couple, had quickly arranged to share a horse from a nearby homestead. No one had offered to help the young woman with a baby and a goat. The salesman had even laughed as they rode away. "Good luck with your unusual family, miss." Now, as darkness fell completely and the rain turned to sleet, Eliza wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Noah's whimpers had grown more insistent, and even Trouble had stopped fighting against the rope, trudging miserably beside her. A flicker of light in the distance gave her hope. As she drew closer, she could make out the outline of a large ranch house set back from the main road, with a sprawling barn and several outbuildings nearby. A lantern hung from the porch, swinging in the wind, its golden light a beacon in the storm. Eliza hesitated at the gate. She had learned the hard way that strangers couldn't always be trusted, especially men who lived alone in remote places. But Noah was growing dangerously cold, and she was near collapse herself. Decision made, she pushed through the gate and approached the house. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warm light behind him. He held a shotgun casually in one hand. "State your business," he said, his voice deep and wary. His face remained in shadow, but Eliza could make out broad shoulders and the outline of a cowboy hat. "Please," she said, her teeth chattering. "My baby needs shelter from the storm." The stagecoach broke down miles back. The man's gaze moved from her face to Noah, bundled against her chest, and then to Trouble, who chose that moment to shake himself vigorously, sending water droplets flying. "Is that a goat?" he asked, incredulity evident in his voice. "In children's night clothes?" Despite her exhaustion, Eliza felt a flash of defiance. "Yes, his name is Trouble." A beat of silence followed, broken only by the howl of the wind and Noah's growing cries. "Well," the man said finally, stepping back from the doorway, "that's the most interesting sight I've seen in these parts for some time." Hope surged through Eliza. "Then you'll help us?" The man leaned his shotgun against the wall and crossed his arms. "Name's Jackson Blackett. This is Dreaming Creek Ranch." He studied her for a long moment. "Where you headed?" "Silverbrook," Eliza replied, shifting Noah to her other arm. "For work?" Jackson nodded slowly. "Town's still 3 miles from here. Roads'll be washed out by morning with this storm." As if to emphasize his point, lightning flashed, illuminating the yard and the driving sleet. In that brief moment of brightness, Eliza caught her first clear glimpse of Jackson Blackett. A man perhaps in his mid-30s, with a face weathered by sun and wind, dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples, and eyes the color of a winter sky. "Please," she said again. "Just for tonight. We'll be gone at first light." Jackson's gaze moved once more from Eliza to Noah to Trouble. The goat had stopped shivering and was now staring intently at something inside the house. "Curious," Jackson murmured almost to himself. Then, louder, "What's the goat looking at?" Eliza turned to follow Trouble's gaze. Through the open doorway, she could see a painting hanging on the far wall, a dreamlike landscape of mountains and valleys shrouded in mist. Before she could respond, Noah let out a particularly loud wail, and Trouble bleated in apparent sympathy. The synchronized sound seemed to decide something for Jackson. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Stay," he said abruptly. "If they dream the same thing." "What?" Eliza asked, confusion momentarily overriding her desperation. Jackson's expression softened slightly. "Old family saying. Means fate has a hand in things." He stepped back further from the doorway. "Come in before you all catch your death." Relief washed over Eliza as she crossed the threshold, tugging Trouble alongside her. The warmth of the house enveloped them immediately, a blessed contrast to the biting cold outside. The interior was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor rancher. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across simple but sturdy furniture. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that looked well read. The painting that had captured Trouble's attention dominated another wall, a large, haunting landscape that seemed somehow familiar to Eliza, though she was certain she'd never seen it before. "The goat stays in the mudroom," Jackson said firmly, pointing to a small side room near the kitchen. "I'll find something dry for it to sleep on." "He," Eliza corrected automatically. "And thank you." Jackson raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he disappeared into what Eliza presumed was a bedroom. He returned moments later with a stack of towels and a worn flannel shirt. "For you," he said, handing her the items. "Bathroom's through there. Get yourself and the baby dried off." He paused, then added, "There's a cradle in the spare room. Belonged to my sister's boy when they visited last summer." Eliza hesitated, clutching the dry clothes. "Why are you helping us?" Jackson's expression darkened momentarily. "Been a time or two when I needed help myself." He turned away, moving toward the kitchen. "I'll make some coffee. And warm milk for the little one if he takes it." Alone in the small bathroom, Eliza quickly stripped off her sodden clothes and dried herself and Noah with the rough, but clean towels. The flannel shirt Jackson had provided hung nearly to her knees, clearly his own, but it was warm and dry. Noah, wrapped in a fresh blanket she'd managed to keep dry in her pack, had stopped crying and was now gazing around with curious eyes. "What do you think, little man?" she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Can we trust this cowboy and his talk of dreams?" Noah's only response was a gurgle and a tiny hand reaching for her hair. When Eliza emerged from the bathroom, she found Jackson in the kitchen, stirring something on the wood stove. Trouble had been settled in the mudroom on what appeared to be an old horse blanket, his wet pajamas removed and hanging on a hook nearby. "He's content enough," Jackson said, nodding toward the goat. "Though he keeps staring at that painting." Eliza glanced at Trouble, who was indeed still fixated on the dreamlike landscape. "It's a beautiful painting," she offered. "Your work?" Jackson shook his head. "My mother's." She painted what she saw in her dreams. He turned to face Eliza fully. "You never told me your name." "Eliza," she replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Eliza Harlow. And this is Noah." Jackson nodded, his expression unreadable. "Stew's almost ready." "Not much, but it's hot." As they ate at the kitchen table, a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and cornbread, Eliza found herself studying Jackson Blackett surreptitiously. Despite his initial gruffness, there was a gentleness in how he moved around the baby, careful not to make sudden noises or movements that might startle Noah. His hands, rough and calloused from ranch work, nonetheless handled the coffee pot and bowls with surprising grace. "What brings you to Silverbrook?" Jackson asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not many come this way, especially not with a baby." His eyes flicked toward the mudroom. "And a pajama-wearing goat." Eliza hesitated, stirring her stew. How much should she tell this stranger? "I'm looking for work," she said eventually. "I have skills, bookkeeping, teaching. I heard Silverbrook is growing. Might need someone like me." Jackson's expression suggested he knew she wasn't telling the whole truth, but he didn't press. "Town's small. About 300 souls. There's a silver mine that's brought some prosperity. School might need help. Last teacher left to get married last spring." "And you?" Eliza asked, attempting to redirect the conversation. "You run this ranch alone?" A shadow passed over Jackson's face. "Now I do. Was my father's place, before the consumption took him 3 years back." He stood abruptly, collecting their empty bowls. "Spare rooms down the hall." I put fresh linens on the bed and set up the cradle. Eliza recognized the dismissal. "Thank you, Mr. Blackett." "For everything." "Jackson," he corrected, his back to her as he washed the dishes in a basin. "Mr. Blackett was my father." That night, as Eliza lay in the unfamiliar bed with Noah sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside her, she strained to hear any sounds that might indicate danger. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling around the eaves of the house, rain lashing against the windows. Occasionally, she heard the floorboards creak as Jackson moved about in another part of the house, but he made no attempt to approach her room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events that had led her to this place, this stranger's home in a remote Montana valley, replayed in her mind with painful clarity. 12 months earlier, she had been Eliza Chapman, respectable schoolteacher in Denver, engaged to be married to William Harlow, the bank manager's son. 6 months ago, she had become Mrs. William Harlow, convinced she had secured a future of comfort and respectability. 3 months ago, Noah had been born, tiny but healthy, the image of his father with his dark hair and blue eyes. And 1 month ago, she had discovered the truth about the man she had married. His gambling debts, his involvement with dangerous men, the money he had embezzled from his father's bank. The final straw had come when she found William in Noah's nursery, drunkenly promising their infant son to a loan shark named Victor Reynolds as collateral for his debts. Eliza had waited until William passed out, then packed what she could carry, taken what little money remained in the house, and fled with Noah in the night. Trouble. The goat William had ironically purchased to provide fresh milk for their son had followed them to the train station, refusing to be left behind. In a moment of whimsy, or perhaps desperation for any ally, Eliza had purchased a ticket for the animal as well. Now in a stranger's house in a valley she'd never heard of until a week ago, Eliza wondered if she had made the right choice. William would be looking for them. Or rather, Reynolds would be. The loan shark wouldn't easily forgive the loss of his collateral. A soft bleating from the direction of the mudroom interrupted her thoughts. Trouble, apparently disturbed by the storm. The sound was followed by Noah's whimper, as if in response to his unlikely friend's distress. Sighing, Eliza rose from the bed and lifted Noah from his cradle. "Shall we check on our companion?" she whispered, wrapping a blanket around them both. The house was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace. Eliza moved carefully through the unfamiliar space, following the sound of Trouble's increasingly insistent bleats. When she reached the mudroom, she found the goat standing at attention, staring at the back door. "What is it?" she murmured, peering through the darkness. A movement outside the window caught her eye. A shadow moving across the yard toward the barn. Jackson, she realized, wrapped in a heavy coat against the storm. Curiosity overcame caution. Settling Noah more securely in her arms, Eliza opened the mudroom door just enough to slip outside onto the covered porch. The wind had died down somewhat, though rain still fell steadily. From this vantage point, she could see Jackson entering the barn, lantern in hand. For a moment, she considered returning to bed. Whatever the rancher was doing in his barn in the middle of a stormy night was none of her business. But something, perhaps the same instinct that had urged her to flee Denver, pushed her forward. With Noah protected beneath her borrowed shirt and a blanket, Eliza darted across the muddy yard to the barn. She hesitated at the door, then pushed it open just enough to peer inside. The interior was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Lantern light cast a golden glow over the stalls, where several horses nickered softly. In the center of the barn, Jackson knelt beside what appeared to be a small makeshift bed of straw and blankets. As Eliza's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she gasped. Lying on the blankets was a tiny fawn, its spindly legs tucked beneath it, white spots still visible on its reddish coat. At her gasp, Jackson turned sharply. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "You should be asleep." "I heard you leave," Eliza admitted, stepping fully into the barn. Trouble was agitated. As if summoned by his name, the goat pushed past her legs and trotted into the barn, his hooves making soft clicking sounds on the wooden floor. Jackson's expression softened as he looked from Eliza and Noah to the goat approaching the fawn with obvious curiosity. "Found her 3 days ago," he explained, returning his attention to the fawn. "Mother was killed by wolves, too young to survive on her own." Eliza moved closer, fascinated. "You're caring for her?" Jackson nodded, reaching for a bottle of milk warmed by the lantern. "Feeding her every few hours. She's too young to be without her mother." The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Eliza. She watched as Jackson gently coaxed the fawn to take the bottle, his large hands incredibly gentle with the fragile creature. "What will happen to her?" Eliza asked softly. Jackson didn't look up from his task. "She'll stay until she's strong enough. Then she'll have a choice. Return to the wild or remain here." He glanced up briefly. "Her decision to make when the time comes." To Eliza's astonishment, Trouble approached the fawn without his usual skittishness, sniffing curiously at the smaller animal. The fawn, for her part, seemed equally interested in the goat, stretching her neck to touch noses with him. "Well," Jackson said, a hint of amusement in his voice, "seems they've taken to each other." Noah chose that moment to wiggle in Eliza's arms, making his presence known with a soft coo. The sound drew the attention of both animals, who turned to regard the baby with identical expressions of curiosity. "Looks like you've got yourself a regular menagerie, Mrs. Harlow," Jackson observed. Despite everything, her exhaustion, her fear, the uncertainty of her future, Eliza found herself smiling. "Just Eliza, please," she said. "And yes, it seems I do." They stayed in the barn until the fawn finished her bottle and drifted back to sleep, Trouble curling up protectively beside her. The unlikely companionship between the two animals stirred something in Eliza, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt since fleeing Denver. As they walked back to the house, the storm finally beginning to abate, Eliza gathered her courage. "You said I could stay if they dreamed the same thing," she said, nodding toward Noah in her arms. "What did you mean by that?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his face thoughtful in the faint light of the retreating storm. "My mother believed that dreams reveal our true nature," he said finally, "that when two souls dream the same dream, they're meant to walk the same path." "And you believe that?" Eliza asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Jackson's lips quirked in a half-smile. "I believe there are more mysteries in this world than we can account for." He glanced down at Noah, now sleeping peacefully against Eliza's chest. "Your son and that goat. They seem connected in a way that defies explanation. Like the fawn and Trouble just now. Noah was born early," Eliza found herself saying. "Too small," the doctor said. "Might not survive the night." She swallowed hard at the memory. Trouble had just been purchased to provide milk. "That night, while I sat vigil by Noah's cradle, the goat escaped his pen and somehow found his way to the nursery window. Stood there all night, watching. By morning, Noah was stronger." She shook her head at the memory. "William, my husband, thought it was ridiculous when I insisted on keeping Trouble close to Noah after that, but the baby always seems to know when the goat is nearby. Cries when he's taken away." They had reached the porch, but neither made a move to enter the house. "Dreams and connections," Jackson murmured. My mother would say that's fate's hand at work. Eliza looked up at him, studying his profile in the growing dawn light. And what would you say? Jackson turned to meet her gaze, his eyes surprisingly gentle. I'd say you and your son and that pajama-wearing goat are welcome at Dreaming Creek Ranch for as long as you need shelter. The simple offer, delivered without expectation or condition, nearly undid Eliza's carefully maintained composure. Tears threatened, and she blinked rapidly to hold them back. Thank you, she managed. Just until the road's clear. Then we'll continue to Silverbrook. Jackson nodded, though something in his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her. Dawn's breaking, he observed. Storm's past. You should get some rest. He hesitated, then added, I'll be checking the fence lines today. Storms like this often bring damage. You'll be safe here. The implication that she might not be safe elsewhere hung unspoken between them. As Eliza finally drifted to sleep in the quiet house, Noah secure in his borrowed cradle and Trouble now sleeping contentedly at the foot of her bed, Jackson had relented on the mudroom rule, she wondered about the strange twist of fate that had brought them to Dreaming Creek Ranch. About a gruff cowboy who rescued orphaned fawns and spoke of dreams and connections. About the painting of a misty landscape that seemed to call to something deep within her. For the first time since fleeing Denver, Eliza slept without nightmares. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, then memory flooded back. The storm. The ranch. Jackson Blackett and his talk of dreams. Noah stirred in his cradle, making the soft cooing sounds that usually preceded his hunger cries. Eliza rose quickly, glancing down to find Trouble still asleep at the foot of her bed, his borrowed blanket thoroughly chewed along one edge. You're going to get us thrown out before we're ready to leave, she murmured to the goat, who opened one eye, regarded her with his customary indifference, then promptly went back to sleep. The house was quiet as Eliza made her way to the kitchen, Noah in her arms. She had expected Jackson to be present, but found only a note on the kitchen table, written in a surprisingly elegant hand. Gone to check fences. Coffee on the stove. Help yourself to anything in the pantry. Back by midday. J.B. Beneath it, he'd added. P.S. Fed the fawn. Your goat insisted on helping. Eliza smiled despite herself. The idea of Jackson dealing with Trouble's stubborn nature while trying to feed a baby deer created an oddly endearing image. After preparing a bottle for Noah and finding some bread and preserves for herself, Eliza ventured outside to explore Dreaming Creek Ranch in the daylight. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving behind a landscape of vivid greens and blues beneath a cloudless sky. The main house stood on a gentle rise, overlooking a creek that wound its way through a meadow before disappearing into a pine forest. Beyond the trees, mountains rose majestically, their peaks still snow-capped, despite the summer season. It was, Eliza realized with a start, remarkably similar to the landscape in Jackson's mother's painting, the one that had so captivated Trouble. With Noah contentedly cradled in one arm and Trouble following at her heels, Eliza walked the property, taking in the well-maintained barn, the sturdy corral, the small vegetable garden beside the house. Everything spoke of care and attention, of a man who took pride in his land despite living alone. In the daylight, she could see what she had missed in the darkness. Little touches that suggested Jackson Blackett was more than just a solitary rancher. Wildflowers had been transplanted from the meadow to create borders along the walkway. A bench beneath a large oak tree faced west, perfectly positioned to catch the sunset. Wind chimes crafted from silver cutlery hung from the porch eaves, creating delicate music with every breeze. Inside the barn, Eliza found the fawn awake and alert in her makeshift bed. The tiny creature regarded the newcomers with liquid brown eyes, ears twitching curiously. "Hello, little one," Eliza said softly, kneeling beside the straw bed with Noah still in her arms. "Aren't you a pretty thing?" To her surprise, Trouble approached the fawn with unusual gentleness, nuzzling the spotted back with his bearded chin. The fawn, far from being frightened, leaned into the contact. "Looks like you've made another friend," Eliza told the goat, who responded by lying down beside the fawn, his solid presence seeming to comfort the younger animal. By mid-morning, Eliza had explored as much of the immediate property as she could while carrying Noah. Returning to the house, she was struck again by its unexpected warmth. Despite being a bachelor's home, it held none of the coldness or utility she had expected. Instead, books filled shelves, hand-braided rugs covered wooden floors, and family photographs. Though dusty, sat in simple frames on the mantel. Curiosity drew her to these photographs. One showed a younger Jackson standing beside an older couple, his parents, she presumed. Another featured a young woman with Jackson's same dark hair and winter sky eyes, cradling an infant. His sister and her child, perhaps. But it was the largest photograph that captured Eliza's attention most strongly. Jackson, perhaps 10 years younger, standing beside a striking woman with light hair and a gentle smile. His arm was around her waist, and they were both laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "My wife," came Jackson's voice from the doorway, startling Eliza so badly she nearly dropped the frame. "Catherine!" Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks as she carefully replaced the photograph. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." Jackson waved away her apology, crossing the room to stand beside her. He smelled of fresh air and horses, his clothes dusty from riding. No harm in looking. He reached out to straighten the frame with a gentle touch. "Been gone 7 years now." "I'm sorry," Eliza said again, this time for a different reason. Jackson's eyes remained on the photograph. "Fever took her. Same one that nearly claimed my sister's boy." He cleared his throat. "That's why I keep the cradle. Reminded me life goes on, even when you think it can't." The simple honesty in his words touched something in Eliza. Before she could respond, Noah made his presence known with a hungry cry. "Sounds like someone needs attention," Jackson observed, the moment broken. "I was about to make some lunch. You're welcome to join me." As they shared a simple meal of cold chicken and cornbread, Eliza found herself studying Jackson more openly. In daylight, she could see the silver at his temples more clearly, the lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, nonetheless moved with a certain grace, as he prepared food and set the table. "The roads to town should be passable by tomorrow," he said, breaking a companionable silence. "I can take you in the wagon, if you'd like." Eliza nodded, though she felt a curious reluctance at the thought of leaving Dreaming Creek Ranch. "Thank you. That's very kind." Jackson studied her over his coffee cup. "What will you do in Silverbrook?" "Find work," Eliza replied, the answer automatic by now. "Find a place to live." "Running from something," Jackson said quietly. It wasn't a question. Eliza stiffened. "Why would you say that?" "Recognition," he replied simply. "Seen that look before. In the mirror, after Catherine died." He set down his cup. "Not asking you to explain. Just offering an observation." The lack of judgment in his voice loosened something in Eliza's chest. "My husband," she found herself saying, "he made some poor choices. Dangerous ones." She glanced down at Noah, peacefully sleeping in her arms after his feeding. "Choices that put our son at risk." Jackson nodded slowly. "Man who'd risk his child isn't much of a man at all." "No," Eliza agreed softly. "He isn't." Another silence fell between them, but this one held a new understanding. "Town's sheriff is a good man," Jackson said eventually. "Marcus Stone. Fought together in the cavalry before I came back to run the ranch. If you need protection, he's one to trust." Eliza's throat tightened at the implied offer of help. "Thank you." Jackson stood, collecting their plates. "Got more fence to mend this afternoon. You're welcome to come along, if sitting in the house doesn't appeal." He glanced at Noah. Fresh air might do the little one good. The offer surprised Eliza. "I wouldn't want to slow your work." A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's lips. "Could use the company. Gets quiet out there, with just the horses for conversation." That afternoon found Eliza perched on a fallen log, Noah sleeping in a makeshift sling across her chest, watching as Jackson repaired sections of fence damaged by the storm. Trouble and the fawn, whom Jackson had taken to calling Dream, grazed nearby, an unlikely pair that seemed utterly content in each other's company. As Jackson worked, he spoke more than he had in the house, telling Eliza about Dreaming Creek Ranch, how his grandfather had claimed the land after the Civil War, how his father had expanded it, how he had modernized parts of the operation after inheriting it. He spoke of the challenges of ranching in the Montana Territory, of harsh winters and dry summers, of predators and cattle thieves. "But you love it," Eliza observed. "This land." Jackson paused, hammer in hand, surveying the vista before them, rolling meadows giving way to forests and mountains beyond. "It's in my blood," he said simply. "Can't imagine being anywhere else." "Even alone?" The question slipped out before Eliza could stop it. Jackson resumed his work, driving a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "Been managing." "I'm sorry," Eliza said quickly. That was presumptuous. "No," Jackson sighed, setting down his tools. "It's a fair question." He came to sit beside her on the log, keeping a respectful distance. "After Catherine died, thought I'd follow her. Couldn't see the point in going on." His gaze drifted to the distant mountains. Then one morning, found that Fawn's mother caught in a poacher's trap. Too late to save her, but she'd just given birth. Found Dream hiding in the brush nearby. He fell silent for a moment, remembering. Thought about leaving her. Nature's way, some would say, but Catherine would have never forgiven that. A small smile touched his lips. "She always said we're put here to help each other through the hard times, so I brought the fawn home. Started caring for her, and found I couldn't give up when something else was counting on me to live." The simple honesty of his story moved Eliza deeply. Without thinking, she reached out to touch his hand briefly. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Jackson agreed. Then, with a quickness that suggested he wasn't comfortable dwelling on the subject, he stood and returned to his work. "What about you? Always been good with numbers?" Grateful for the change of subject, Eliza told him about her years as a schoolteacher in Denver, her love of mathematics, how she had helped William with the accounts at his father's bank before discovering his embezzlement. "Never understood men like that," Jackson commented, securing a fence post. "Taking what isn't theirs. Betraying trust." "I didn't understand it either," Eliza admitted. "Not until it was too late." They worked and talked through the afternoon, falling into an easy rhythm. Jackson would repair a section of fence while Eliza held tools or simply provided conversation. When Noah woke hungry, Jackson turned his back to give her privacy to feed the baby. When the fawn needed her bottle, Eliza helped hold her still while Jackson administered the milk. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. Noah had been unusually content throughout the day, fascinated by the outdoor sights and sounds. Even Trouble had behaved, staying close instead of wandering off, as was his usual habit. "Thank you," Eliza said as they reached the porch. "For today. For everything." Jackson nodded, his expression softening in the golden light. "Been a good day," he acknowledged. "Best in a while." That evening, after a supper of venison stew and fresh-baked biscuits, they sat on the porch watching twilight deepen over the valley. Noah slept in Eliza's arms, his tiny face peaceful in repose. Inside the barn, Trouble had taken up residence beside Dream's straw bed, the goat apparently having appointed himself protector of the fawn. "Curious pair," Jackson observed, nodding toward the barn. "Natural enemies in the wild. Goats and deer compete for the same food, same territory. Yet those two act like they've always belonged together." "Noah and Trouble are the same," Eliza said thoughtfully. "By all logic, a baby and a goat shouldn't form an attachment. Yet they have." Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering. "My mother would say it's because they share the same dream. And what do you say?" Eliza asked, echoing her question from the night before. This time, Jackson answered differently. "I say some connections defy explanation." His gaze, when it met hers, held something Eliza wasn't ready to name. "And some are worth protecting no matter the cost." The implication hung in the air between them, that he saw her situation clearly, that he understood her fear, that he was offering, what? Protection. Sanctuary. Something more? Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the twilight stillness. Jackson was on his feet immediately, hand moving to the pistol he wore at his hip. "Stay here," he said quietly, all warmth gone from his voice. "Take Noah inside." "Who is it?" Eliza asked, already rising, clutching Noah closer to her chest. Jackson's expression was grim. "Victor Holloway. Owns the biggest cattle operation in the territory. Been trying to buy Dreaming Creek for years." His eyes met hers briefly. Not a man to cross. Fear, cold and familiar, settled in Eliza's stomach. She hurried inside, watching through the window as 3 riders approached the house. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, expensively dressed despite the dusty trail. Even from a distance, Eliza could sense an aura of entitlement about him, a confidence born of always getting what he wanted. Through the partially open window, she could hear the conversation on the porch. "Blackett," the lead rider called, dismounting with fluid grace. "Been a while." "Holloway," Jackson acknowledged, making no move to invite the man closer. "What brings you to Dreaming Creek?" Holloway removed his gloves, taking his time. "Just being neighborly. Heard you took in some strays during the storm." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A woman? A baby? And a goat, was it?" Word travels fast in these parts. Eliza's blood ran cold. How had news of their presence spread so quickly? "My business who I help," Jackson replied evenly. "Not yours." Holloway chuckled, the sound lacking any real humor. "Everything in this valley is my business, Blackett. You know that." He took a step closer, especially when strangers might bring trouble. "Only trouble I see is standing on my porch," Jackson said, his hand still resting on his pistol. The tension between the 2 men was palpable, even from Eliza's position behind the window. Holloway's companions remained mounted, hands suspiciously close to their own weapons. "Careful, Blackett," Holloway warned, his pleasant tone belied by the hardness in his eyes. "Man in your position can't afford enemies." "Meaning what, exactly?" Jackson demanded. Holloway spread his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "Just that times are hard. Ranch like this, running on a shoestring since Catherine passed. Be a shame if something were to happen. Fire, rustlers, accidents." He paused meaningfully. "Dreaming Creek would be safer under my protection." "Not selling," Jackson said flatly. "Never will. Especially not to you." Holloway's facade of pleasantness slipped, revealing something ugly beneath. "Everyone has their price, Blackett. Even you." His gaze shifted to the house. "Even your guests." Eliza stepped back from the window, heart pounding. There was something in Holloway's tone, something that suggested he knew more than he should about her, about why she had fled Denver. "Get off my land," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." For a tense moment, Eliza thought Holloway might refuse. Then he laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant in the gathering darkness. "As you wish. For now." He remounted his horse with the same fluid grace. "But do ask your pretty guest about William Harlow of Denver. And the money he owes certain associates of mine." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good evening, Blackett." As the 3 riders disappeared into the twilight, Eliza sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Noah stirred against her chest, sensing her distress. Jackson entered the house, his expression thunderous. "You heard?" Eliza nodded, unable to speak past the lump of fear in her throat. "Want to tell me what Victor Holloway knows about you and your husband?" Jackson asked, his voice carefully neutral. Eliza closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. When she opened them, she met Jackson's gaze directly. William embezzled money from his father's bank to pay gambling debts. The men he owed, one of them must be connected to Holloway. Jackson's expression didn't change. "And the baby?" Eliza tightened her hold on Noah. "William offered him as collateral." Her voice broke on the last word. "Our son, his own child. He offered him to a loan shark named Victor Reynolds to guarantee payment of his debts." Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. "So you ran?" "Yes," Eliza whispered. "I took Noah and fled. Trouble followed. He's always been attached to the baby." She shook her head, still baffled by the goat's devotion. "I thought we'd be safe here, this far from Denver. How could they know?" "Men like Holloway have long reaches," Jackson said grimly. He paced the length of the kitchen, thinking, Reynolds must be Holloway's associate. Probably telegraphed descriptions once you were missed. "We have to leave," Eliza said, rising shakily to her feet. "Tonight, I won't bring danger to your door after all your kindness." "No," Jackson said firmly. "Running now would be exactly what Holloway expects. Give him an excuse to pursue you." He shook his head. "Besides, where would you go? Roads are still muddy from the storm. You wouldn't make it far, not with Noah and that goat." "I can't stay," Eliza protested. "Not now that Holloway knows about William's debts. He'll use me to pressure you to sell the ranch." Jackson's expression hardened. "Let him try." He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "Eliza, listen to me. I've dealt with Victor Holloway for years. Man's a bully and a thief, but he's careful about crossing certain lines. Open violence against a woman and child, that would turn the territory against him. You don't know what these men are capable of," Eliza said, remembering the cold calculation in Reynolds' eyes when he'd discussed taking Noah as payment. "Maybe not," Jackson conceded. "But I know what I'm capable of." The quiet certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Eliza's spine, not of fear, but of something far more complex. "And I know Sheriff Stone, and half the ranchers in this valley who are tired of Holloway's tactics." "Why would you risk yourself for us?" Eliza asked, searching his face. "You barely know us." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his expression softening as he looked at Noah, then back at Eliza. "Maybe it's your boy and that goat dreaming the same dream." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Or maybe it's that for the first time since Catherine died, this place feels like a home again, not just somewhere I exist." The simple honesty of his words stole Eliza's breath. "Jackson," he held up a hand, stopping her. "Don't need to decide anything tonight. Just don't run. Not yet." His eyes, usually so guarded, held a plea. "Give me a chance to help. To make this right." In the quiet of the kitchen, with Noah warm against her heart and Jackson Blackett standing before her like a bulwark against the storm she'd been running from for so long, Eliza made her decision. "We'll stay," she said softly. "For now." Relief washed over Jackson's features. "Good." He cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. "That's good." Later, as Eliza lay in bed, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant nickering of horses, the soft bleating of trouble keeping watch over Dream in the barn, the creak of floorboards as Jackson made one final check of the property before retiring, she wondered at the strange twist of fate that had brought her to Dreaming Creek Ranch. She had fled one danger only to encounter another, yet somehow, in this weathered house with its dreamlike painting and its solitary owner, she felt safer than she had in months. Perhaps it was Jackson's quiet strength, his unassuming competence. Perhaps it was the way Noah had settled into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something to do with dreams and connections that defied explanation. Whatever it was, as sleep finally claimed her, Eliza found herself hoping that, for once, running wasn't the answer. That perhaps, against all odds, she had found a place where she and Noah could stand their ground. A place that, even after just 2 days, felt strangely like home. The next morning dawned with a sense of purpose that had been absent from Eliza's life since her desperate flight from Denver. She rose early, Noah still sleeping peacefully in his cradle, and found Jackson already in the kitchen, his hair damp from washing, the scent of coffee filling the air. "We're going to town," he announced without preamble, setting a mug before her. "Need to see Sheriff Stone. Get ahead of whatever Holloway's planning." Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing strength from its solidity. "Will the sheriff believe us? I have no proof of William's dealings with Reynolds." "Marcus is a good judge of character," Jackson replied, his confidence unwavering. "And he's no friend to Holloway. Lost his brother's ranch to one of Holloway's schemes last year." As they prepared for the journey to Silverbrook, Eliza was struck by how different this day felt from the countless others she'd spent looking over her shoulder, waiting for disaster. There was still danger. Holloway's visit had made that abundantly clear, but for the first time she wasn't facing it alone. Jackson hitched his wagon while Eliza fed and changed Noah. To her surprise, Jackson had fashioned a small pen in the back of the wagon, lined with fresh straw. "For your goat," he explained, noting her questioning look. "Figure he'd raise hell if left behind. And Dream's coming too. Needs her bottle every few hours." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, acknowledging the peculiar bond between Noah and Trouble, making space for her unconventional family in his plans, touched Eliza deeply. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. Jackson nodded, a hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. "Practical matter," he muttered, though they both knew it was more than that. The journey to Silverbrook took nearly 2 hours along roads still muddy from the recent storm. Noah, secured in a makeshift sling across Eliza's chest, slept for most of the trip, lulled by the gentle rocking of the wagon. Trouble and Dream shared the straw-lined pen, the goat watchful over his unlikely charge, the fawn contentedly chewing on the sleeve of Trouble's pajamas. "Never seen anything like those two," Jackson commented, nodding toward the animals. "Goat should be seeing that fawn as competition. Instead, he's appointed himself guardian." "Like Noah," Eliza observed. "Trouble's been protective of him since birth. The doctor said it was a miracle Noah survived at all, being so small." She smiled at the memory. "William thought I was mad for insisting the goat be allowed near the nursery, but Noah always settled when Trouble was close." "Maybe they do share the same dream," Jackson mused, his voice soft. "Mother used to say some souls recognize each other, no matter what form they take." He glanced at Eliza, then quickly back to the road. Catherine thought that was nonsense. She was practical, believed what she could see and touch. "And you?" Eliza asked. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I've seen too many things in this life that defy explanation," he finally said. "Your boy, and that goat, being one of them." His hands, steady on the reins, tightened slightly. "Catherine and I trying for years to have a child, with no success being another." The simple admission, offered without self-pity, made Eliza's heart ache. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Jackson replied, his voice gentle. "Had 10 good years with her, more than some get in a lifetime." He glanced at Noah, now stirring against Eliza's chest. "And some blessings come in unexpected forms." The genuine warmth in his voice when he looked at Noah startled Eliza. In the short time they'd been at Dreaming Creek Ranch, Jackson had never once treated her son as an inconvenience or an intrusion. Instead, he'd made space for Noah in his life with an ease that William, the child's own father, had never managed. Silverbrook revealed itself as they crested a hill, a small but prosperous-looking settlement nestled in a valley between pine-covered mountains. The silver mine that had given the town its name was visible on a distant slope, and even from afar, Eliza could see the bustle of activity around its entrance. "Town's grown since the new vein was discovered last year," Jackson explained as they approached. "About 500 souls now, up from 300 when I brought Catherine here as a bride." The main street was lined with the usual establishments of a frontier town: a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a small church, and various shops catering to the needs of miners and ranchers. People glanced curiously at the wagon as it passed, their gazes lingering on Eliza and Noah and the unusual cargo of a pajama-clad goat and a fawn. Jackson guided the wagon to a building marked Sheriff's Office and set the brake. "Wait here," he said, jumping down. "Let me speak to Marcus first." As Jackson disappeared inside, Eliza took the opportunity to study the town that might have been her destination if fate hadn't intervened. It seemed pleasant enough, clean, orderly, with signs of prosperity in the fresh paint on the buildings and the quality of goods displayed in shop windows. Yet something about it felt foreign, unwelcoming, compared to the natural comfort she'd found at Dreaming Creek Ranch. "Mrs. Harlow?" Eliza turned to find a well-dressed woman approaching the wagon, her expression friendly beneath a fashionable bonnet. "I'm Rebecca Stone," the woman continued, smiling. "Marcus's wife. Jackson's just told my husband about your situation, and I thought you might appreciate some female company while they discuss matters." She glanced at Noah, her smile softening. "And perhaps your little one would like to stretch after the long ride?" There was something immediately trustworthy about Rebecca Stone. Perhaps the directness of her gaze or the genuine warmth in her smile. Eliza found herself accepting the offered hand-down from the wagon. "Thank you, Mrs. Stone. That's very kind." "Rebecca, please," the woman insisted, leading Eliza toward a small cafe across the street. "Any friend of Jackson's is a friend of ours, especially one who's brought that man out of his shell for the first time in 7 years." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We've only known each other a few days." Rebecca's knowing looks suggested she didn't find this fact particularly relevant. Sometimes a few days is all it takes to recognize what's important. She glanced back at the wagon. "Though I must say, the goat in pajamas is a new one, even for these parts." As they settled at a table by the window, where Eliza could keep an eye on the wagon and its remaining occupants, Rebecca ordered coffee and pastries with the confidence of a regular customer. "Now," she said once they were served, "tell me everything Jackson didn't." There was something in the woman's direct approach that bypassed Eliza's usual caution. Before she knew it, she was sharing the full story. William's gambling, the embezzlement, Reynolds' threats, her desperate flight with Noah and trouble, and finally, Holloway's ominous visit. "Holloway," Rebecca muttered, her pleasant expression darkening. "That man's been a blight on this valley since he arrived 5 years ago, buying up ranches, driving out smaller operations, bribing officials." She sipped her coffee, considering. "But connecting with a loan shark from Denver, that's new, even for him. Do you think your husband can help?" Eliza asked, bouncing Noah gently on her knee. Rebecca's smile returned, confident and reassuring. "Marcus has been looking for a legitimate reason to move against Holloway for years. This connection to Reynolds might be exactly what he needs." She reached across the table to touch Eliza's hand briefly. "You were brave to leave, you know. Many women would have stayed, hoping things would improve." "I couldn't risk Noah," Eliza said simply. "Nothing else mattered." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. A mother's courage, fiercest force in nature. She glanced out the window, where Jackson could be seen emerging from the sheriff's office, accompanied by a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest. "And it seems you found an ally worth having." Something in her tone made Eliza look more closely at Jackson. In town, surrounded by the trappings of civilization, he should have seemed out of place, a solitary rancher more accustomed to horses than people. Yet he carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect, his conversation with the sheriff, marked by the easy confidence of equals. "He's been very kind," Eliza said carefully. Rebecca's expression turned serious. "Jackson Blackett is the finest man in this territory, Mrs. Harlow. Since losing Catherine, he's kept to himself, focused on that ranch to the exclusion of all else." She studied Eliza thoughtfully. "Until now." Before Eliza could respond to the implication, the bell above the cafe door chimed, and Jackson entered with Sheriff Stone. The sheriff was an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard, peppered with gray, and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, extending a hand. "Marcus Stone. Jackson's told me about your situation." Eliza shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip. "Can you help us, Sheriff?" Marcus glanced at his wife, then back to Eliza. "I believe so. I've been building a case against Holloway for months. Land fraud, intimidation, suspicious cattle deaths on properties that refuse to sell to him. Your connection to Reynolds gives me leverage I didn't have before." "How so?" Eliza asked. "Reynolds is wanted in 3 territories," Marcus explained, taking a seat beside his wife. "Extortion, loan sharking, assault. If I can prove Holloway is in business with him, the territorial governor would have grounds to investigate all of Holloway's dealings." Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Eliza's chest. "What do you need from me?" "For now, just a sworn statement about Reynolds' threats regarding your son," Marcus replied. "And then, frankly, I need you to stay safe while I work through official channels." "She'll stay at Dreaming Creek," Jackson said firmly, speaking for the first time since entering the cafe. "Holloway won't risk a direct move against my property, not with half the ranchers in the valley watching him." Marcus nodded in agreement. "I've already sent telegrams to Denver, requesting information on Reynolds and his connection to William Harlow. Should have responses within a few days." He fixed Eliza with a direct look. "Until then, Mrs. Harlow, I must ask you to remain at Jackson's ranch. For your safety and for the integrity of my investigation. I understand, Eliza said, though the thought of imposing further on Jackson's hospitality made her uncomfortable. But I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Jackson interrupted, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. You and Noah, and that troublesome goat, you're welcome at Dreaming Creek, for as long as needed. Something in his expression, in the quiet certainty of his words, silenced Eliza's protests. Instead, she simply nodded, grateful beyond words for this unexpected alliance. After Eliza had given her statement and the Stones had promised to visit Dreaming Creek the following day with any news, Jackson suggested they collect supplies before heading back to the ranch. Might be best to avoid town for a while, he explained as they walked toward the general store, at least until Marcus has more information on Holloway's connection to Reynolds. The general store was a cavernous space filled with everything from nails to fabric to canned goods. The proprietor, a jovial man named Thompson, greeted Jackson warmly and cooed over Noah with genuine delight. Handsome boy, he observed, allowing Noah to grasp his finger. Got a strong grip. That's good luck, you know. As Jackson filled their order, Eliza browsed the shelves, making mental notes of things they might need. She found herself thinking in terms of they and we with surprising ease, as if her presence at Dreaming Creek were already an established fact rather than a temporary arrangement. Near the back of the store, a display of fabric caught her eye, soft flannel in a blue check pattern that would make perfect pajamas for Noah as he grew. Beside it, a bolt of sturdy canvas gave her another idea. "Mr. Thompson," she called, "do you carry leather scraps? And perhaps some wool batting?" The shopkeeper directed her to a bin near the counter, where various leather pieces were sold by weight. Selecting several pieces of soft deerskin and a quantity of wool batting, Eliza added them to Jackson's order. "Planning a project?" he asked, eyebrows raised at her selections. "A proper bed for Dream," Eliza explained. "And new pajamas for Trouble. The ones he has are nearly worn through." Jackson's expression softened into something she couldn't quite name. "Settling in, are you?" The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Eliza met his gaze steadily. "For now," she said, "if that's still all right." "More than all right," Jackson replied quietly, so only she could hear. Dreaming Creek hasn't felt this alive in years. The ride back to the ranch was companionable, filled with discussion of Sheriff Stone's plans and Rebecca's offer to help Eliza find work in town when the situation with Holloway was resolved. Noah, perhaps sensing the lighter mood, was unusually animated, babbling happily and reaching for trouble whenever the goat poked his head over the side of his pen. They were within sight of Dreaming Creek's gate when Jackson suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt, his expression darkening. "Riders," he said tersely, pointing to a dust cloud approaching from the direction of the ranch. "Coming from my property." Eliza clutched Noah closer, fear chilling her blood. "Holloway?" Jackson shook his head, squinting against the afternoon sun. "Can't tell yet." He reached beneath the seat, withdrawing a rifle that Eliza hadn't known was there. "Stay in the wagon. If I tell you to run, you take the reins and go. Back to town, straight to Marcus." "I won't leave you," Eliza protested, alarmed by the sudden shift in his demeanor. Jackson's eyes, when they met hers, held a fierce protectiveness that stole her breath. "Noah needs his mother," he said simply. "Promise me, Eliza." The use of her given name, rare from his lips, underscored the seriousness of the moment. "I promise," she whispered. As the riders drew closer, however, the tension in Jackson's shoulders eased. "King," he said, recognition in his voice and his boys. Three men approached, the leader, a weathered man perhaps a decade older than Jackson, with a shock of white hair beneath his Stetson. The other two riders, clearly his sons based on the family resemblance, flanked him protectively. "Blackett," the older man called, reining in his horse. "Caught some unwelcome visitors on your north pasture. Thought you should know." Jackson stood in the wagon, rifle now resting casually across his arm. "What kind of visitors, Edward?" "Holloway's men," the man called King replied, spitting disgustedly to the side. "3 of 'em, poking around your spring." Ran him off when we spotted him from our side of the fence. Much obliged, Jackson said, his expression grave. King's gaze shifted to Eliza and Noah, curiosity evident in his weathered features. This the woman Holloway's so interested in? This is Mrs. Harlow, Jackson confirmed, his tone suggesting careful respect was expected. And her son Noah. They're my guests. King touched the brim of his hat in greeting. Ma'am. No offense meant by my question. Just that Holloway's been asking all over the valley about a woman with a baby. His eyes twinkled suddenly. Didn't mention the goat in pajamas, though. That detail might have helped his search. Despite her fear, Eliza found herself smiling at the man's attempted humor. No offense taken, Mr. King. And thank you for watching over Mr. Blackett's property. King nodded, apparently satisfied with her response. Been neighbors with the Blacketts for 30 years, ma'am. Watch each other's backs out here. He turned back to Jackson. Marcus Stone stopped by our place on his way back to town. Said to tell you he's posted deputies at both ends of the valley. Holloway's men won't be moving freely for a while. Good man, Marcus, Jackson replied. Please thank your boys for their help, Edward. As the Kings rode off toward their own ranch, Jackson resumed their journey home, his expression thoughtful. Holloway's getting desperate, he observed. Guiding the horses through the gate, sending men onto my property in broad daylight, that's bold, even for him. What was he looking for? Eliza asked, keeping her voice low so as not to disturb Noah, who had finally fallen asleep. Jackson's lips pressed into a thin line. The spring feeds both our properties. There's been talk of diverting it, a project that would benefit the larger ranches at the expense of smaller operations like mine. He shook his head. But trespassing, sending men to scout my land, that suggests something more immediate. The implications hung heavy between them as they approached the ranch house. Holloway wasn't simply going to wait for Sheriff Stone's investigation. He was actively seeking ways to pressure Jackson, and by extension, Eliza. I'm putting you in danger by staying, Eliza said quietly as Jackson helped her down from the wagon. You and your ranch. Jackson's hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. I was in Holloway's sights long before you arrived, Eliza. His gaze, steady and certain, held hers. But now I have something worth fighting for beyond just land and water rights. The simple declaration, offered without drama or expectation, touched something deep within Eliza, a place she had thought permanently closed after William's betrayal. Jackson, she began, but was interrupted by an excited bleating from the back of the wagon. Trouble, apparently sensing they had reached home, was straining against the side of his pen, eager to be released. Dream, equally animated, pranced beside him on spindly legs. Jackson laughed, the sound transforming his usually solemn features. Seems your goat has strong opinions about being kept waiting. The moment broken, they turned their attention to unloading the wagon and settling its various occupants. Yet as they worked side by side in the warm afternoon light, Eliza found herself stealing glances at Jackson, at his careful hands as he lifted Dream from the wagon, at the gentle way he spoke to the animals, at the quiet strength evident in every movement. This man, she realized with startling clarity, was nothing like William. Where her husband had been charming but hollow, Jackson was reserved but substantial. Where William had seen Noah as an inconvenience, Jackson treated him with genuine care. Where William had made grand promises he never intended to keep, Jackson offered only what he could deliver: protection, shelter, respect. That evening, after Noah was settled in his cradle and Trouble and Dream were bedded down in the barn, Eliza sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson. Jackson joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, nodding toward the spectacle nature was providing. Never gets old. No, Eliza agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. It doesn't. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Jackson spoke, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. Been thinking about what King said, about Holloway asking after you all over the valley. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. Man's determined, Eliza. And dangerous. I know, she replied, suppressing a shiver that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. There's something I need to tell you, Jackson continued, setting his mug aside. Something I should have mentioned before. Alarm flickered through Eliza. What is it? Jackson's hands, usually so steady, fidgeted briefly with the brim of his hat, which rested on his knee. When Catherine died, I was lost. Didn't care much what happened to me or the ranch. He cleared his throat, made some poor decisions, borrowed money I shouldn't have, from people I should have avoided. Understanding dawned. Holloway? Jackson nodded, his expression grim. Not directly, but men connected to him. Managed to pay most of it back over the years, but there's still a note outstanding. One Holloway bought up last year when he started trying to force me to sell. How much? Eliza asked quietly. $5,000, Jackson replied. Due in full by the end of the month. The sum was staggering, far more than a small ranch like Dreaming Creek could produce in such a short time. And if you can't pay? Eliza pressed, though she feared she knew the answer. Holloway gets the ranch, Jackson said simply. Legal and tidy. No need for threats or midnight visits. Eliza's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. That's why he was so interested in me, in my connection to Reynolds. He's looking for any leverage he can find. Yes, Jackson agreed, and now he has it. Your presence here gives him two angles to pursue. The debt I owe him, and the threat to you and Noah if I don't cooperate. The realization should have terrified Eliza, and part of her was indeed afraid. But a larger part felt something else entirely. Resolve. After months of running, of reacting to dangers rather than confronting them, she was tired of being a victim. Then we'll have to give him neither, she said firmly. Jackson looked at her questioningly, surprise evident in his features. You said Sheriff Stone is building a case against Holloway, Eliza continued, her mind working rapidly. If we can prove the connection between Holloway and Reynolds, show that they're using illegal means to pressure both of us, it would invalidate the debt, Jackson finished, comprehension dawning. At the very least, it would buy time for a proper investigation. Exactly, Eliza said, warming to the idea. We need evidence. Something concrete that links Holloway to Reynolds and his loan sharking operation in Denver. Jackson studied her with newfound respect. You're not suggesting we run? It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. No, I'm tired of running. She reached over impulsively to cover his hand with hers. This ranch, this valley, it matters to you. And Noah and I. She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. We've found something here worth standing for. The admission hung between them, more significant than its simple words might suggest. Jackson turned his hand beneath hers, entwining their fingers with careful deliberation. Then we stand together, he said simply. Against Holloway, against Reynolds, against whatever comes. In the deepening twilight, with the first stars appearing overhead, and the distant sound of trouble bleating softly from the barn, Eliza felt something she had thought forever lost after William's betrayal. Hope, not the desperate hope that had sustained her flight from Denver, but something stronger. A hope built on solid ground, on shared purpose, on the steady presence of a man whose quiet strength had become her anchor in a storm-tossed world. Together, she agreed softly, her hand warm in his as night fell over Dreaming Creek Ranch. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.